I was asked to do this because I am a Quaker. And the lights were flickering. I was wondering, maybe I stepped on something here. No, it's fine. I am what is called a convinced friend of the Quakers are actually the Society of Friends, and it confuses people. We're like the Mormons are not really the Mormons. They are the Church of Latter-day Saints, but everybody knows them as the Mormons, and they accept that. We accept Quakers. It was a nickname given to the Quakers very early on. So first, before I go into all of these other groups and stuff, I'm going to talk a lot about the Quakers because they were the first ones pretty much here in Livonia. So it's important, and most people don't really know that. So the Society of Friends. This is confusing to people. Oh, by the way, there are 2 Quakers here that I know of. Is there anybody else besides Jason and Kathy that are Quaker or have Quaker heritage? There are a lot of people in the United States that have Quaker heritage going way back. No? Okay. If you have any questions, just raise your hand anytime, and I'll answer your questions, because there's a certain amount of jargon that goes on, or I may not be clear about what I'm saying. I'm happy to talk to you about it. So we're the Society of Friends. Why is it called that? We meet in meeting houses like the Congregationalists do. This is a primitive so-called Christian denomination, hearkening back to Nicene Creed days. There was before there were as an established church. This is an attempt to go back to the very beginnings. Quakers started in northern England primarily by a man. It was started by a man named George Fox in 1650, thereabouts. And they were upset because there was dogma in the church. Everybody was part of the Church of England officially. And even if you didn't, you had to pay a tithe. That really bothered people, that they were getting tithed for things that they didn't believe in, and oftentimes there wasn't enough clergy to actually serve them, but they still had to pay a tithe. So there was a rebellion. At that time, 1650 was the time of the Commonwealth. So you had Oliver Cromwell in England, and you had the Royalists that were around as well. It was the time of the Civil War. That ended in about 1656, 57, and there was a restoration, and Charles II came. So that's the basic where they came from. Why are we called the Society of Friends? I'm just going to read you out of the book of John a couple of verses, and that will explain where this term comes from. Let me get my glasses on. All right. This is my commandment, that you love one another as I have loved you. Greater love has no man than this, that a man may lay down his life for his friends. You are my friends if you do what I command you. No longer do I call you servants, for the servant does not know what his master is doing, but I have called you friends, for all that I have heard from my Father I have made known to you. So that is where the Quakers decided to call themselves a Society of Friends. So that's where it comes from, and that's all there is to it. All right. I'm going to give you, at first, a fair amount about the Quakers in terms of history, just to place them, understand why they came here and did what they did. It's going to take a couple of minutes, but after that, it'll be more free-flowing. So bear with me, but if you have any questions at any time, just raise your hand, and if I'm not seeing you, just pipe up. Nominally, Quakers are Protestant, that is non-Catholic or Church of England Christians, and were first formed in England in about 1650, as I said. I say nominally, unlike many mainline churches, it is not necessarily a requirement that Quakers believe that Jesus is the Savior or that the Bible is the only revealed Word of God. Quakers believe that there is that of God in every individual, no matter what age or where they are from, and that if a person is perceptive enough, they may hear what God is saying to them directly. This is considered perpetual revelation and is looked upon as a reversion to the primitive church prior to its codification by a priestly hierarchy. This has made Quakers quite radical in their approach to establishing the kingdom of God on earth, as they believe in the intrinsic equality and worth of all individuals. This means there is equality of women, men, and children with no racial or class distinctions. This insistence on equality caused all sorts of problems socially and politically. Many liberal Quakers use the concepts of simplicity, peace or pacifism, integrity, community, equality, and stewardship to guide them as they move through life. Because Quakers refused to swear allegiance to the first Oliver Cromwell and then to first Oliver Cromwell and then Charles II upon the Restoration, they were barred from universities and the professions in England. So we're talking 1650s, 1660s. We see similar discrimination on loyalty in some of the purges in our own government today. As a result, they went into business because they couldn't go into the professions. They were not allowed into universities. They were idealists, and it turned out good business people. For example, Quakers founded Lloyd's of London Bank, Barclays Bank. Why? One of our tenets is integrity. We give our word and we keep it. There'll be some other ways that it manifests itself in our society today. Quakers have a huge influence on our society. Barclays Bank, Carr's Crackers, you eat Cadbury chocolate, and many other businesses that are not necessarily as well known in this country. However, many Quakers felt at risk in England and took the opportunity to move to America in the 1660s and 1670s to live their lives in their own manner. It is often said that Quakers came to America to do good, ended up doing well. Philadelphia was the largest. Pennsylvania was established by William Penn. He was an aristocratic man. His family was owed a lot of money by King Charles II. They helped him out during his exile. And in lieu of getting paid in cash, which he didn't have, he gave Pennsylvania as a colony to William Penn. So this is 1660s. This colony was unique in that it was open. Unlike the Puritans in Massachusetts, who kept everybody out that was not a Puritan. As a matter, a Quaker was put to death for insisting on coming back over and over again. The Quakers allowed everybody in. Amongst them were the Amish. People often mistake Quakers for Amish or Amish for Quakers. Why were the Amish in Pennsylvania? Because we Quakers are ecumenical. We don't judge other people by their beliefs or by what they do as long as they are in keeping with our tenets of peace and equality and so on. And so often, because there's so many Amish in Pennsylvania, they assume that somehow we're connected. We are not. We are, however, connected to the Shakers. The Shakers were founded by some Quakers in England originally, but they moved to the United States for similar reasons. They are significantly different because where Quakers are anarchistic, we are very fractured. The Shakers are communitarian. They're communists, basically. They live in communities, and they are celibate. So, and they're called Shakers as opposed to Quakers because sort of akin to some of the denominations we have in the United States where Pentecostal denominations where people are emoting physically. That was the Shakers. They danced collectively. They sang Simple Gifts. We all know that song. It's the Shaker hymn. Quakers are quiet in their services and so on. So that is a connection. We are oftentimes connected with the Mennonites and the Church of the Brethren because we three churches are pacifists. So we are called peace churches. And the Quakers actually, in conjunction with Quakers in England, won the Nobel Peace Prize for providing relief work in Europe after both World War I and World War II. And so we work together with other people and we help everybody. Quakers, and this is the Quakers that came here, do not proselytize. We do not go to door, knock on your door, and give you pamphlets or anything like that. It's left up to Providence to direct individuals to find us and join a Quaker meeting. So that's the way I joined. Somebody suggested I attend. I was brought up a Russian Orthodox. I was very active in that church, and then as a young man I broke away. Somebody suggested I look at the Quakers. It was an immediate match for me. That's very typical. So we always have a string of people coming through meeting who are checking us out. My meeting, by the way, is in Detroit. There's one in Ann Arbor. It's a big one. There's one in East Lansing, or in Lansing now. There are many college towns in Michigan have Quaker meetings. There are also Quaker churches. I will give you a view of how this all breaks down a little bit. While liberal Quakers generally do not proselytize, some conservative Quakers do. Quakers have traditionally been quite conservative fiscally and liberal socially. Lloyd's Bank, Barclays Bank, which is mentioned, William Penn, Herbert Hoover, Richard Nixon, George Fox, Margaret Fell, Lucretia Mott, John Woolman, and Elizabeth Fry. These are all names that you might run across historically. Elizabeth Fry was involved with prison reform. This is something that affects our society. For a long time, you either went to jail or to prison. But for a while, we had what we termed penitentiaries, penitents. Because there is that of God in each individual, we feel there is that allows people to redeem themselves. And so that whole idea of being penitent in a way and coming to terms with yourself and improving yourself, everybody has that capacity. And so Quakers tend to be moved that way. Anyways, our society has gotten away from that. You hardly ever hear the word penitentiary anymore. 50, 60, 100 years ago, you heard that a lot. Now it's just prison or jail. Because we are, as a society, I would say, we are much more punitive than many other places. Thomas Paine was a Quaker. Walt Whitman's family were Quakers. There's lots and lots. James Dean was a Quaker. Judi Dench is a Quaker. David Lean, the director who did Lawrence of Arabia and Bridge Over the River Kwai, is a Quaker. There's lots of them around that you can't tell by looking at us generally. Colleges, Bryn Mawr, Swarthmore, Haverford, Whittier, Wilmington, Johns Hopkins, in Richmond, Indiana, Earlham College. These are all Quaker schools. I mentioned Richard Nixon. He was from a more conservative branch of the Quakers, but he went to Whittier College, which is a Quaker school. That's where he grew up, actually. And Swarthmore. Swarthmore was one of the first colleges for women and came out of this. Lucretia Mott and so on. This is a woman a Quaker, and many Quakers were involved in the first Seneca Falls Convention that kicked off the suffragist movement. And so we have a lot of that. So, Michigan. Michigan governors. John S. Berry was governor from 1842 to 1846, then again from 1850 to 52. And then Fred M. Warner, who was governor for 6 years, also came from a Quaker family. So, I mean, it's around, you don't realize it, but this influenced things a lot. So, is there any questions about what I've read you? This is sort of okay. Chris, you want to do the next one? All right. So, Quakers, where did they come from and come here to the United States, or to Michigan? What we're talking about is people from this area right in here. The Finger Lakes here. This is where Farmington, New York, and Livonia, New York are. So when they moved from here and they went across and ended up here, they brought their names with them. So that's why we have Farmington and Livonia here and not something else. If you have questions about Farmington, you should ask Kathy Builder. She knows everything there is to know about Farmington, and I don't know that much. So, yeah. So, but anyways, that's so. So besides that, there were also Quakers moving in from New England, from New York, Pennsylvania, and so on. But primarily this bunch that we're talking about that came originally to Livonia and settled here came from this area right here. Indians, and then this never-ending conflicts between the original French settlers. So why, I mean, Michigan's been there forever, right? Why did all of a sudden they, in the mid-1820s, did they come across? One thing was Michigan, up until then, was very hard to access. And it was notorious for being wet. Most of the marshes and so on have been drained, but it was not looked upon as good soil for farming. And most of the people moving here are farmers. Secondly, it's known for a lot of warfare. Detroit was a fort. And that's because there was a lot of conflict between the French and the British, and then between the British and the Americans. There were just a lot of fighting going on. Originally, people just didn't have a way of getting there. Up until 1825, there was no canal, Erie Canal. Once that happened and you could get to the water and you could go around by boat, you could easily get to Michigan, relatively speaking. Otherwise, you had to go across on foot, across Ontario, what was then known as Upper Ontario. And it was a slog. So I had a guy told me about a story in how long it takes to get places. One of the earliest settlers in Ann Arbor was a farmer. He needed to get a new plowshare. He had to go to Detroit to get it and then walk it back. It took him 4 days just to go from Ann Arbor to Detroit and back. And so you can see how that amount of travel would keep people from coming across. There was a lot of Indians in Michigan at that time, and people were scared. There had been a lot of fighting going on in the East between Indians who had allied themselves with the French and the Indians who had allied themselves with the British during the French and Indian War. In the 1860s or late 50s and into the 1760s and 1760s, and they were scared. People would not go there. So that's why there was a fort in Detroit. And it was like a little mini Gaza Strip along the Detroit River. And outside of it was just basically no man's land. And people just were not comfortable trying to go there. So what happened? All of a sudden, people started coming. Chris, you want to the next slide? All right, this, what I was telling you about how hard to get to. This is the Black Swamp. This is Toledo, and this is a 100-mile-long swamp. It was virtually impenetrable, especially if you had wagons or something. You had to go all the way around. It made it undesirable to get up to Michigan. Plus, you knew there were Indians up there. I mean, we're talking Pontiac and Tecumseh and all these people who fought in this area. They weren't, people were just scared. So this kept people from going. So when they were able to get across using Lake Erie, it made a huge difference because they could bypass this. And there were no roads up in here. This was a swamp, but it was also marshy up in here. They had to drain all of this. And even today, as you know, Lake Erie has a terrible algae bloom problem annually. That is actually the result of this. It's black dirt now instead of black swamp, but it's flat. So there's not much moving water. So farmers are using this. They're putting pesticides and whatever, fertilizer on their crops, and it goes out into the lake, but it just sits there, and then you end up having this. So this is something that's goes way, way back. So, all right, next slide, please. All right, we're going to get to this part, but I'm going to talk to you also about, give you an idea how rural this area was. The federal census in 1800 for Michigan, can anybody guess how many people lived in the state of Michigan that was European descent? 3,757. That's for the entire state of Michigan. There were many more Indians in Michigan than there were white people. So that was, then Michigan became a territory in 1805, and then had had a treaty with the Indians in 1807. And then over the next 35 years after that, the rest of Michigan was taken over by the American government from the Indians. We treated the Indians in Michigan terribly, but it wasn't as bad as other places. We have reservations in Michigan. Mount Pleasant, they're around. UP has quite a few of them, so on. Ohio, for example, has none. They have no Indian tribes there at all. They just kicked them out. And the Indians in Michigan knew this already because Ohio was settled before Michigan was. And so when the American government came in and said, listen, you guys, we just beat the British in the War of 1812, and you fought with them, so you lose all your rights, but we're going to be nice and pay you. Of course, they're only going to pay them 0.5 cents an acre, but we're going to do that. And they negotiated. They got some rights to stay and have some reservations. And they also asked for education. They wanted their children to have schooling. That part basically was not adhered to by the government. They just reneged on that contract. And until the 1970s, when they got sued by some of the tribes here, and now their descendants can go to universities here in Michigan for free. But that was something that was supposedly done way back 200 years ago, and the government just reneged. All right, so the government bought this land. They made a ton of money. They were paying 0.5 cents an acre, and they were selling them for the land here in Farmington for $1.25 an acre. So that's huge markup. So they were very pleased with themselves. And so that was really the impetus. The government really sort of forced the issue. I was talking about the treaties. The first treaty was 1795, the Treaty of Grenville. It was that strip along the Detroit River, which included Detroit. In 1810, the population in Michigan had already increased by 25%. It was 4,762. The War of 1812 came along, and then there was another treaty, and then by 1820, it had already doubled. So it was 7,452. It doesn't sound like a lot, but that's, percentage-wise, is a lot. The Erie Canal opens in 1825, as I mentioned, and then the population of the Europeans here was 28,000. So it quadrupled in a matter of a decade. So it makes a big difference. So that's really what brought these, the access was there. And there was the Indians had been dealt with, so people didn't worry about that. And the government was selling land cheap. So all those things brought the Quakers here. One of the problems that Quakers and often a lot of other rural people have in New York, and it's going to happen in Michigan too, is they're farmers, they have lots of kids, and they grow up. What do? They're farmers. There's no industry around for these people to go to and make money. The farms aren't big enough to sustain multiple generations, so they end up moving. So I think that's the reason a lot of these people from Farmington and Livonia, New York, ended up coming this way. They just needed someplace to live. Any questions, observations? No. By the way, by 1900, the population of Michigan was 2,420,000. So big increase. This was the beginning of it all. All right. I want to point out, this is Farmington, the city limits right here. They say it's a T, shaped like a T, actually shaped like a pistol. But, and this follows Farmington Road to 9 Mile, and basically it follows Grand River. So that's Farmington itself, and that's a lot of Quakers ended up living here, and just all of this is all one area, basically. The Quakers slipped down into here, but this was the concentration. There's Power Road, which is, I think, right here, north-south. Yeah, here it is. So this is Power Road. Power was a Quaker, and so it goes all the way down here, and almost 8.5 Mile Road. But there are other names, Botsford, Quaker. There's other people, but this is where they lived. This is an odd-shaped city. Why they didn't square it off, I have no idea.
It's odd-shaped because they had a couple of annexations.
So, at any rate, so this is where there is Gill Road, and just north of Grand River on Gill Road is the Quaker cemetery, and I have a slide of that. You'll see it. But so this was a concentrate, and this is very, very rural. No roads. There was a few trails. Everything was on foot. As most of you probably know, originally Livonia was a series of little hamlets, little scattered around the area, usually on a river. So down on Plymouth Road and so on and so forth. There's little Newburgh Center and so on. There's little pockets of people, but there was no distribution, even distribution around what is, then it was just a territory. So was there any questions on this? Okay. All right. Arthur Power came in 1824 from upstate New York to find property. He and his family were from Farmington Township, Ontario County in north central upstate New York, about 20 miles southeast of Rochester. The initial trip was during the winter, which made it easier because the ground was frozen and you didn't have to sink into the ground when you're traveling. With power cutting across from Buffalo to Windsor by sleigh, he bought his section of land, it's 160 acres in what is now Farmington Hills, at $1.25 an acre. He brought his sons John and Jared, as well as friends David Smith and Daniel Rush. They came by boat, probably using the Erie Canal, which was opened in 1825. Then came the rest of his family. He was a widower, including son Nathan, who died in 1874. In 1835, Arthur died of cholera. His farm was essentially at the southwest corner of 11 Mile and Orchard Lake Road. This is where the Farmington Hills City Hall and the 47th District Court are located. Power Road runs north-south from about 11.5 miles through Freedom Road, or Grand River, down to about 8.5 miles at Colfax Street. And it's equidistant between Farmington and Orchard Lake Road. So you can find that. Nathan Aldrich also arrived in 1824 and joined with the Farmington Quakers. First meeting house was erected in the 7 Mile Farmington Road area. So this is in Livonia. So even though they didn't have the boundaries, there was no Farmington, as an entity. They just called themselves that. So then they built one a little farther west in 1846. It seemed to have had that area, 7 Mile and Farmington. At that time, Farmington Road was named Livonia Center Road. Like we have Canton Center Road, because that's the center of the city. There's 3 miles to Haggerty and 3 miles to Inkster. So that was the center. Later it got renamed Farmington. So that was the deal. This new meeting house they had at Quaker Acres had a cellar, and it was accessed through a trap door. It's been speculated that this cellar may have been used to hide individuals who had been enslaved. They would have come up from the south and come through the area on their way to Detroit, eventually Canada. These are people that would have come up through Indiana and Illinois because you couldn't get through the swamp. So they had to go around. Lemuel Botsford, whose house was at 24414 Farmington Road, was a prominent Quaker who moved to what is now Farmington itself in 1836. So it was a little later, but Botsford Inn, you're all familiar with that. The Quaker Cemetery in Gill Road, I've told you about that. It's about 9.5 mile road in Gill Road. It's very interesting. There is a book I use, and I don't have it with me. I brought up 7 or 8 of my things on the table there, and you're welcome to look at them. They're easily obtainable books, and if you're interested in this sort of stuff at all about the history of Livonia, this area, they're on the table, and you can take a look at them or take a picture of them and order them for yourself. So there's a pictorial history by Lee S. Peel. I'm sure you know this book. It's a big book. It's in our public library here in Livonia. You can take it out. It's fascinating. It gives you a lot more detail about this and just how this whole area developed. And then my wife's favorite teacher, Dominic Paris, wrote a book called The Story of Livonia, Footpaths to Freeways. My wife had him as a teacher. And
She doesn't have good things to say about it.
yeah. But at any rate, it's a standard text, also available in the public library, but you can also find it used. So while they were present early on, there were actually in numbers, there were very few Quakers in the area. So we're talking a handful of families. So it was a very fragile group. So if any of them decided to leave for whatever reason, it would really make a big dent. This did happen. Some of the early Quakers passed on or passed away. And so what did they do? They didn't have enough to really have a real Quaker meeting. So a lot of them became Universalists and joined other congregations, or even the Congregationalists. So even though they sort of disappeared as a religion about the time of the Civil War, so they weren't here very long. Um, their cemetery still exists, and the people that did stay ended up going to other denominations. This happens a lot in our society today. People church shop. They hop from one church to another and so on. That's just the way it is. And any questions? Okay. So next slide, please. This should be very familiar because it's right out front. This is Newburgh Church. This is not a Quaker building, obviously, and I'm not going to talk a lot about it. If you're interested, it was built in 1848, so about 20 years after the Quakers got here, and it was moved here to Greenmead in 1977, and it was opened in Greenmead in 1984. There is, next slide, please. This is the sign that is out by the building. So if you're interested in this building, you should check it out. It's right there. It's right there. This church sponsored a cemetery. If you go down to Newburgh Cemetery on Ann Arbor Trail, this was came out of this church. So even though this church doesn't exist anymore, that cemetery still exists. It's got a sign of its own and is a significant historical object in this country. This church also diminished over the years, and it merged with the Congregationalists. So the Methodists and the Congregationalists merged and became the Newburgh Methodist Church. The belfry was added in 1892, and the school wing was added in 1889. In 1915, this church was moved a half a mile west from its original site to the northeast corner of Newburgh Road and Ann Arbor Trail in an effort to increase the congregation size. It was placed on skids and pulled by horses. The vestibule was also enlarged, and the bell tower was rebuilt in 1948. And so anyway, this is the next church. Okay. This is the church that still exists across the street from the senior center. It's now the Journey Church, and it was also built early on, I think in 1831, and it's one of the earliest congregations in the area. And it was played a central part. It was right at what was called Livonia Center, so it was right there. And let's see. It's 1881. 1881? Oh, I missed. Okay. I put in 31 by accident. Okay, thank you. So just everybody knows about Presbyterians, so I'm not going to go into that. It's not like the Quakers or some odd. This also became the Grange Hall. They merged. In the back, there was a building, and it was added on. They moved it and added on, so it's still there. If you look at it from the side, you can see there's an addition on it. It doesn't fit exactly.
The back half is the Grange Hall, the front half is the church.
Right, right. What did I say the other way? Yeah, okay. So, yeah. Eventually, the church stopped meeting there in 1903 after 10 years of being inactive. It was moved to where it is exactly now, just a little bit, and it was auctioned off, so for $100. Next one, please. Oh, this is what I was talking about, yes. The first Presbyterian church, Newburgh Center, Livonia, was the Newburgh Presbyterian Church, 1835. Played an important role, so on and so forth. And as it declined, people joined other churches. That's really what you need to know. Again, if you have interest in any of these churches, some of the books I have there talk about them, and you can find more about it. So, okay. Next one, please. Okay, St. Paul's. It was established in 1872. It moved several times. It's now on Farmington Road between 6 and 7 Mile next to St. Aidan's Catholic Church. So, can you have the next slide, please? That's what it looks like now. You want to go back to the other one? So that's what it looked like. Now that's what it looks like now. Okay. It's, I think it's a Missouri Synod. No? Wisconsin Synod? Yeah. So, as with Quakers, there are different denominations within the denomination. So it's, and I can't tell you the difference. So, okay. The next one, please. All right. Yes. Methodism was the largest denomination in Livonia. They were originally centered in the area of Schwartzburg Village on Ann Arbor Trail between Stark and Wayne Roads. Some of the Methodist churches later reformed themselves into the United Methodist Churches. There were a lot of Germans that started coming in those days, and as well as English speakers. And oddly enough, the Germans were more liberal than the English speakers. But they were struggling, for the same reasons everybody else was struggling. So they merged together, joined forces, so to speak. But the Germans insisted that the English-speaking denominations become abolitionists and integrate if there were black parishioners. And after quite a while, it finally did happen. But the United Methodist Church, there's one on 6 Mile, St. Matthew's, came out of that union. So, just want to next one, please. So that's St. Matthew's right there. So. Okay, next one. All right, St. Matthew's Catholic Church in Livonia, Michigan has a long and significant history. Founded in 1830, pardon? St. Mike's, I'm sorry, St. Mike's. In 1837, it is one of the oldest Catholic parishes in the region. Here's a brief overview of its history. St. Michael's was established to serve a growing Catholic population in Livonia. This is 1837 to 1850, which was primarily composed of German and Irish immigrants. The first church building was a modest structure reflecting the modest means of the early parishioners. Growth and development up to 1900, as the community grew, so did the church. The original building was replaced by a larger structure in the 1850s. Throughout the late 19th and early 20th centuries, the church expanded its facilities and services, including the establishment of a school to provide religious and academic education to local children. That church, as far as I know, is knocked down. You want to have the next slide, please? This is St. Mike's today. It's also St. Michael the Archangel. It's the other one, as far as I know, is not called St. Michael the Archangel. This particular church is now the Archangel. So it's just 2 blocks from where I live, actually. So it's a big congregation. Next one, please. That church is at the corner of Hubbard and Plymouth, right across from Bill Brown Ford. So it's there. So this is the Quaker Meeting House here, a couple hundred yards away. This was in that Quaker Acre, 7 Mile and Farmington site, and it was moved here. It was after the Quakers left, it was used as a home. People lived in it. So it has some characteristics that are relatively common to Quaker meeting houses. It has 2 front doors. The right side was for women, left side was for men. They worshiped together, but they didn't conduct business together. So there was a partition down the middle that separated them. They could see each other, but they conducted business together. Women took care of certain aspects of the meeting, and men did other things. This was essentially an outgrowth of the society of the times. I mean, Quakers were quite liberal and egalitarian, but they couldn't quite shake that distinction between the genders in terms of who took care of what, and there was that. The interesting thing about that division was that because women ran their own business, they got to be in leadership positions. There are no churches, and there are some churches in Livonia today that if you look at their leadership, it's all men. Even today, back then, this was extremely radical. So what did these women in the Finger Lakes area where these Quakers came across from New York, they were very involved in Seneca Falls Conference, where the establishment of the suffragist movement was. These women knew how to do stuff. They were leaders. They were leaders here. They were leaders in society as well. Women were allowed to preach or to minister and so on. They were very used to this. So it's interesting thing. Over time, this practice has disappeared. There may be Quakers that still segregate women from men for certain things, but I'm not aware of it. So, but even if you go to Philadelphia, there's some big, huge meeting houses which are 20 or 40 times bigger than this. They'll have, separate doors. This meeting house you can rent, and I've been in it many times actually, and it's a quite interesting building. It is the oldest meeting house, Quaker meeting house in Michigan. So, next slide, please. So this is the meeting house that they came from in New York. Again, there are 2 doors. You can't really see it very well, but there's a door here and there's a door here someplace. So these are Quakers, and this is from later on, but that's what it is. Very plain buildings. There's no steeples, no belfries, nothing like that. There's no clergy. The congregants are the clergy. We minister to each other. Next one, please. These are actually friends of mine. They live in Hastings, Michigan. They're often mistaken for Mennonites because there are a lot of Mennonites in that area. And he actually lived in Corktown for a while. He went to Wayne State University and became a Quaker. And they dress plain. Quakers didn't always do that, and they don't do it so much anymore. There are various branches of Quakerism. They do this for mindfulness. Some people wear crosses. They're doing this, they're showing their devotion essentially. And they live out there in Hastings on a farm. And if you go to Indiana, Illinois, maybe Ohio, southern Ohio, you will find people who are dressed plain. Why do they dress plain? As I mentioned, it's egalitarian society. When Quakers came up, there was huge stratification between classes. You had nobility, aristocratic people, you had merchants, you had people with money, but everybody and they wore fancy clothes to designate their own status. Quakers don't do that. There are doctors, for example, in my meeting. Everybody's on a first name basis. There's no Dr. Miller or anything like that. It's Bernie, you know, and that this is part of that. The other part of this is color. The Quakers in the late 18th century stopped wearing color. Why? Is it a protest against or action against slavery. Almost all coloring for clothing was derived from slave labor. And so they started wearing white and black because didn't require the dyes that were produced by enslaved people. And that carried on. There are still people that wear black. You will see Quaker oatmeal or Quaker so on and so forth. This company just took the name. They're actually from Chicago. And they just took that. This was in the late 19th century. Because Quakers had a reputation of being pure and simple. And that's what they were advertising in their pure and simple oatmeal and cornmeal. So that was it. They have no connection to Quakers whatsoever. A little closer, but also not. Okay, I'll be done in a second. Quaker oil, Quaker State Oil. They're from Pennsylvania, but that's the only thing that has to do with Quakerism. Okay, I'm sorry. Next one, please. This is the Quaker cemetery on Gill Road. So I recommend you go up there. You can see it right from the street. You can go in, but there are quite a few headstones there. The early Quakers didn't use headstones. It's egalitarian. It's what you do on earth that's important. They're not worried about the afterlife. Okay, next one, please. This is Quakertown in Livonia. It's a neighborhood that's designated by the city. All of these, Quakertown Lane, Lapham, Stacy, Rio, Swarthmore, remember Swarthmore College? Penn Drive, William Penn. This is that neighborhood. There probably were some Quakers that lived there as farmers, but there was not a Quaker center per se. That's just the city's attempt to.
Sue Daniel had the honor of naming the subdivision.
Yeah.
And the streets.
Yeah.
Our Sue Daniel named it.
Yeah, Sue Daniel was.
She thought the Union Society building across the street was a Quaker meeting house.
Yeah.
Yes. She was wrong.
Yeah. Yes. There is the next slide is going to be this. Right. This is it. Want to go back a second? It's right here. It's right there. And so a lot of, matter of fact, go ahead, Chris. So this is that. This is the Union Society building. Quakers were involved in this, but it's not a religious building. It was used as a meeting house. Sojourner Truth, William Lloyd Garrison, abolitionists, they met here. This was used as you had to belong. It was a club, essentially. And they used it as a community center. So the Trinity House Theater is in there now. They have music every week. I recommend it. It only seats 75 people. It's one of the greatest venues around for any folk music or even rock and roll and jazz. They do this. It's very inexpensive, and I recommend it highly. So I'm sorry I ran so long. Any questions before I wrap up?
Better turn it over right away.
Okay.
Yeah, Steve needs.
Well, thanks, Peter. I actually could have just continued to enjoy listening to you, so appreciate that history. Good to see you all. So I don't come to this as an academic, it's a practitioner. So my master's in social work looked at the role of religion and social justice at MSU, go green. And my work over the years, both for the Catholic Church and for the Interfaith Roundtable, which began in Detroit in 1941, it began in New York in 1927. It was a national conference for Christians and Jews. So my work in interfaith activity over the last 30 years has been more of an organizer, bringing people to come to know the other and then engage in various activities. So that continues to this day. So the things I know come from being out in the vineyard, being out in the field. It's interesting that Livonia has changed, right? I mean, what's constant is the Christian hold in Livonia, and that's a good thing. The three types of Christianity are well represented, both the Catholic branch, even have a former Catholic church that does Mass in Latin on Sunday and is no longer considered part of Roman Catholic tradition, but it's there. Churches, there were 6 Catholic churches at one point, now there are 5. The church I went to, St. Maurice, became a Maronite Catholic church, St. Rafka of Lebanese immigrants. But like everything else in Livonia from the 60s and 70s, my middle school, my grade school, and my high school all were repurposed and closed, and the church did as well. I mean, population changes. So Protestant Christianity, the second of 3 types of Christianity, is alive and well in Livonia, and we're seeing some changes there with the mega church, and maybe Ward Presbyterian might be considered that, and then the smaller, more evangelical churches like 242, and there's another couple. I'm speeding through this. But you also see ethnic groups, racial and ethnic groups that have come into Livonia as our population, thank God, changes and becomes more diverse. So, you see the Korean Seventh-day Adventist church, you see a Chinese Baptist church. The black community has 2 primary churches, one on Farmington Road by Orange Lawn, rather. It was somebody help me, that was a Protestant Christian church, maybe Methodist. It's now a Church of God in Christ, Temple of Praise Church. I bicyced by there one Sunday, and it was just a parking lot full of African-American sisters and brothers. Like, Lord, what's going on here? And there's also a growing church on Middle Belt and 7 Mile. Yvette Warren, prophetess pastor Yvette Warren, is the co-pastor with her husband, who's the bishop-elect, Willie Warren, who was just named a police chaplain. That's more of a Pentecostal type expression. Black folk, like white folk, are in all of our congregations, right? And like some of the white folk who live here, they travel to their parish or their church in Detroit, or they travel around the suburbs to where they want to go. Similarly, in the black community, Solomon Kinlock, who's running for mayor, has Triumph Church. They don't even call it Baptist Church anymore. He's got 7 campuses around the region. So I was trying to get a handle on how our new neighbors are fulfilling their religious obligations or interests. The Orthodox, the third branch of Christianity, is present in Livonia. Obviously, a lot of folks know of St. Mary's, the Basilica of St. Mary's. It's an Antiochian Orthodox church, and right there on Merriman Road at 6.5 Mile. It's beautiful. If not been in there yet, a lot of us have been in the hall, right, for whatever we're there for. But if you get in the Basilica, the iconography is just outstanding. We also have a Russian Orthodox church on 7 Mile, and another Orthodox church. Let me tell you what that one is as I speed through here. It is the Greek Orthodox Church on 5 Mile, right across from the oasis there where you get the Greek festival. I wanted to mention St. Rafka, which took over St. Maurice Church, is a Maronite rite, and there are 5 rites of the Catholic Church. So if ever on Jeopardy that question comes up, give me credit. Just click it in. Got to click. So the other rite of the Catholic Church here is a Ruthian Byzantine church, Sacred Heart. The other 3 types of rites of the church, we'll just let that go for now. What's interesting is the rise of globalization and our population changing because of people moving about, original homeowners selling. We're seeing our demographics change. People of different races and religions are here, and one group are Muslims. We have our first mosque in Livonia over at Ann Arbor Road and Newburgh Road, Ann Arbor Trail and Newburgh Road. It's part of the Muslim American Society. It formed in 2023. Obviously, Muslims have been coming to this area for years, certainly during the diaspora of the early 70s from Palestine and elsewhere. Our Congresswoman, Rashida Tlaib, is a Muslim woman. And you'll notice more and more hijabs, especially if you're down in Hines Park, but you see more and more people are moving from Dearborn into Livonia, and you'll see a parallel increase in their houses of worship. Right now we have 1 mosque. We also have a longer-standing Jewish community here. In 1958 is when I traced a congregation, Beit Kodesh, which was on 7 Mile Road. They started meeting here in 1958. They were at the Clarenceville Elementary School. They met at Botsford, speaking of the Quaker community, and they formed their synagogue in 1959. It closed in 2011. There was another synagogue startup that moved out, became B'nai Betham, and Beit Kodesh moved with B'nai Moshe. It's a conservative congregation. We also have the vestiges of that larger Jewish community that lived here in the cemetery on Middle Belt, just north of 6. My first sobriety test of the day. But we have a Chabad, a Lubavitch, I don't want to say that too fast, but a Lubavitch synagogue. It's an Orthodox synagogue here in Livonia, recently formed, but very ecumenically focused, so ecumenically focused that they're really only seems to be only interested in other Orthodox Jews of that ilk, right? There are conservative, there's Reform Jews, there's other branches of Judaism.
Lubavitch they want to energize more secular Jews to become more Orthodox.
Well, I'm seeing that, but if you got a potential to become...
They're not trying to convert.
That's right. No, a Jewish friend of mine, because there are a number of Jews that live in Livonia, that work here, etc. Yeah, they knocked on my door and they brought me some of this special bread. And she goes, that's not my cup of tea. I go to the synagogue in West Bloomfield. But that's here, right? I mean, you think of Livonia, you don't think, oh, we have a mosque, we have a synagogue, we have a Hindu temple. Some of you may have seen that on 7 Mile Road as you're moving east from Middle Belt. And they're going to expand. They got to get city permission. So that's a large Hindu temple. Many Hindus live in Livonia, but they go to other temples. A lot of those correlate to where they're from in India. This temple on 7 Mile they're involved in planning our Interfaith National Day of Prayer. So if I forget to tell you about it, May 1st, for a long time, our Christian brothers and sisters have held their day of prayer. They have their prayer breakfast, etc. And that's what they want. They don't really want non-Christians to be a part of that planning. So ecumenism is what we might call that, is a wonderful thing. I mean, for Christians, uniting the body of Christ, getting Christians together. That's for some that's go. For others, the reach goes further to other believers, other people who are spiritual, other people who are philosophical, right? And that's maybe more the landscape I can give you more information on. So the Hindu temple, like I said, it's the young man just yesterday sent me a one-pager. That'll be in what I write and send for the newsletter or for the website. But fascinating group, and it's good to see they're involved in planning this May 1st event at Madonna at 6 o'clock. So you'll come in, and Bill Joyner's printing this in his Friday Musings. You'll see tables set up with information about all of our newer religions and others, and have a chance to get to know people. That's a secret sauce, right? There's a theologian, Thomas Keating, who said, love is fidelity to the demands of a relationship. That is, when you come to know somebody, I think the Creator has some spiderweb powers. Just my own theologizing. Sorry, doctor. We have a theologian in the room, so the grassy knoll is not here anymore. But anyway, basically what Keating was saying is when you come to know and care about somebody, there's a fidelity that emerges. You start to be concerned about what their concerns are because you've had a chance to have a deep heart connection with them. So maybe that won't happen at Madonna when you're grabbing a little snack or something before the program that starts at 7. I hope I haven't lost everybody, but there's going to be a gathering where we have expressions of the religions that exist, Christianity as well as Hinduism, Buddhism, Islam, Judaism, right? You're going to get a sense of all of that with choirs and singing and poetry, and it should be well worth it. It'll be the first one that happened here in Livonia. I helped start one in Troy 20 years ago, and thank God they're still meeting and they're still growing so people can come to know their neighbors. Oh, whipping through this. So we also have had traditionally a large Sikh community. And some people say Sikh because Sikh sounds like a religion is Sikh. Some of us say, yeah, they are. But anyway, the first Sikh temple came here in the late 90s, and it was on Bradner and 5 Mile. So it's not in Livonia proper. You have a couple miles west of our boundary. And then they moved into what was going to be a health club at Schoolcraft and Haggerty. I don't know if you remember watching that being built, but that's even closer to our borders. So, yeah. They used to have a big horse out in front of it. It was going to be this lavish health club, and they ran out of money to open it. It now is a beautiful Sikh Gurdwara. I think for me, of all of my interfaith gatherings and stuff events I've been to over the last 30 years, Sikhism is there's something compelling about it. They emerged out of a supersaturation of Hindus and Muslims in India, and they endured a lot of persecutions. I think all of their first 10 gurus were martyred and killed. So there's a warrior spirit of these Punjabi people, but their spirit of equality and service to the poor is just, anyway, I don't want to get off. That's a whole session on Sikhism. But all of these places of worship I'm telling you about, other than coming on May 1st to Madonna and meeting them, is finding ways to get to their places of worship. So during Ramadan, the Muslims have iftars, It's when they break their fast, and the imam I just spoke to driving here, I've been trying to gather this information. It's like, yeah, pulling teeth. So, Betty, yeah, we had a community iftar. We invited people from the neighborhood, like, oh, I wanted to flood your place with all my new friends. But anyway, so we have the Sikh temple, the mosque. There's a Buddhist meditation center on Middle Belt just now. Here I go again. That would be south of 7 Mile. It is, let me show off my ability to say words in Dharmic tradition. The Great Lakes Buddhist Vihara Center for Peace and Meditation. And they're going to get back to me. It's so chill. I reached out months ago. We'll get back to you when we're able to. So I'm just so chill telling you about it. There is also Native Americans. Wayne County has the highest concentration of Native American Indians in Michigan. And you probably didn't know that, because one thing Native American folks learned how to do, what to do, is be invisible due to all that they had to endure. But yet, once a year, some of you may have been to it or seen it at Nankin Mills, where Livonia Center or Farmington Road dead ends into the Heinz Drive there. The North American Indian Association, which is on Telegraph just east of, on Plymouth Road, just east of Telegraph, they have their annual powwow. And it's a little sampling of some of the sacred activities. Interesting, Peter, it was only and all of you, but Peter, I'm looking at you because we were talking about the natives. It was only 1978 that the Native Americans were covered under the Freedom of Religion Act. So the things that they would do, the sweat lodge, the smudge, the different things that they would do were prohibited. They go to jail for them. So, but it's an important part of our community, and I didn't do a land acknowledgement, but I think it's been covered that we recognize this was land that was once ancestral land to our native people. I snuck it in, Jim.
I wouldn't let them do it at the Bentley Market thing. It was a terrible disaster.
No, it was.
We had a good discussion.
I was, when a non-native person, although I'm under the influence of Ojibwe spirituality, when a non-native person gives a land acknowledgement, when there's a native person in the room, it's like, come on, brother, get up here and say it. But some of you might, I'll close with this, just the Pew study on religion. The Pew folks did a study this past February, and it was released, and I just took some notes from the NPR articles. Yep, Cliff Notes got me through grad school and high school and everything. So that's why I'm a practitioner, not an academic. But I think it's interesting, and it's kind of helps put a frame around why is it that we're seeing smaller congregations where St. Maurice and St. Genevieve's merged, where the aging out of a lot of our Protestant populations, right? The churches are getting smaller, fewer services, fewer people. The Pew study, I think, shines some light on that. And just bear with me, I'll just throw out a couple highlights. So it says Christianity is on the decline, and those with no religious affiliation are on the rise. The share of Americans who identify as Christian is dropping, and those who say they're religiously unaffiliated now make up a major portion of the U.S. population. I think Livonia is obviously microcosmic of this. 62% of U.S. adults now say they're Christian. That's down from 78% Pew found in a similar study back in 2007. So that's, 18 years? However, that number has stabilized more recently. Greg Smith, a Pew researcher, says the change is related to what he calls generational shifts, which is where you have more and more people who have no religion having children. And so you have more and more people who are children were raised with no religion, and many of them grow up without any particular religion themselves. Also, fewer people are switching to Christianity from other religions. Another way to understand this would be to imagine there are about 6 people who were raised as Christians and no longer identify as such for every 1 convert to Christianity. The study also points out 29% of Americans now identify as religiously unaffiliated, which can mean agnostic, atheist, or just nothing in particular. That's an all-time high. And the percentage of people in the U.S. who identify as a specific religion other than Christian is on the rise. They now make up just over 7% of the U.S. population. Lastly, I'm speeding through this, man. Lastly, while organized religion may be on the decline, Pew says spiritual beliefs are widespread. 86% of Americans believe in a soul, and 83% believe in a God. For me, the way I make a sense of this, when I was a prison chaplain, and I remember quoting St. Augustine. Some of you may have heard of St. Augustine, the African bishop. He had said, our hearts are restless till they rest with God. And I was trying to give a reflection on that in the prison, in Jackson Prison, and the guy goes, man, Steve, there's a hole in my heart only God can fill. And you know, over the years, it stuck with me. So maybe we replace God with love, but I think all of us are united by wanting to fill that space in our heart that only each of us can give to the other. So, amen.